Show. So we all know that talking to kids about their sexual health, it can be pretty daunting, but sex educator and author Cory Silverberg says it's now more important than ever.
Their new book, You Know, Sex, spells it out in an honest and inclusive way, and they're here to tell us all about it. Welcome back to the show, Cory, my friend. Nice to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Well, a huge congratulations. Your books are always a huge hit in our house. So congrats on the newest book. It is out today. The timing is perfect because my 8-year-old daughter, Marqueza, as I mentioned, we do have all your books, and they have taught us so much. And now she's asking really specific questions. So what is this new book all about, and will it help?
Yeah, well, I hope it will help. It's much bigger, and so it is very specific, so she'll be happy about that. The big thing to know is it really is geared to kids who are either experiencing puberty or who have like a number of their peers who are. And so, the timing makes a big difference. I don't think that it hurts for kids to get information a little too early, but it just sort of goes over their head. The thing that's kind of different about it is it's sort of like our earlier books, is that it really values parents sharing their beliefs and values with their kids. So it isn't so much like a textbook that just gives the answers. It's kind of a book that is meant to create conversation and also build curiosity in kids.
I mean, that's what I've loved about the experience of reading your books with our son, is that it does inspire conversations. But let's talk about the size of this book. It is big. It is like an encyclopedia, but it doesn't look like any encyclopedia that I've ever seen. So what are some of the more important, but maybe less typical topics that the book covers, and why did you feel it was important to include them?
Well, I mean, a lot of traditional sex education just sticks to kind of the biomedical parts, the how babies are made, how not to get pregnant. And so what we include is a lot of stuff like self-care, like how do we as 10, 11, 12-year-olds take care of ourselves, which we do. Of course, our parents take care of us too. Things like self-care, mental health. There's some harder topics that I'm glad that are in there. But for example, there's a chapter on abuse, which doesn't usually get in these kinds of books, but it's needed because we know that information is prevention, that information is a way to protect kids. And then I'd say there's other stuff that I kind of wish didn't need to be in books for kids, but it does. So a good example is pornography. There's a short chapter on pornography. I wish kids just couldn't get access to that, but they do. And so we need an opportunity to talk about it because it doesn't really come up every day.
Yeah, those are really, really tough ones. Glad that they're in the book for sure. So I'm going to share a funny story because it's a little odd, but maybe, maybe not odd for kids who are born and raised on farms and agricultural kids, because I actually learned about the mechanics of intercourse on the farm because I would actually help my father when we were breeding the stallions and the mares from a very young age. It's just what we did on the farm because we have a breeding facility. And so that's kind of how I learned about, as I said, the mechanics.
Right.
But then I have an 8-year-old daughter, and so she's not growing up seeing that and helping on the farm the same way that I did. So what are the tips that you have in getting kids engaged in the nitty-gritty that a lot of parents just are not ready for?
Right. Well, I mean, first I want to say I don't think it's weird, and I think it's actually this great gift that you had, this kind of mundane, everyday excuse for your parents to talk to you about these things. And that's kind of the problem, right, is when does this stuff come up in most of our lives? So that's part of my tip. My tip is that it really needs to become a kind of everyday conversation. And I'm not talking about, you're not bringing up like intercourse at the breakfast table, but when we're talking about sex education, especially for puberty age kids, most of it is about relationships. Most of it is about feelings. Things like why do we think that kids with short hair are boys and kids with long hair are girls? Or why does everyone all of a sudden want to talk about crushes? Those are sex education conversations. And I think that what we really want to do is make it part of an everyday thing. So then they'll keep coming back with questions.
One issue I think a lot of parents are dealing with these days is inclusiveness, especially in terms of trans and non-binary children. It is a subject that a lot of people feel like I don't know really about that. I don't know how to talk about that, but maybe they want to. So what's your advice for parents who are navigating these discussions?
Well, the first thing is to know that it's actually good. As an educator, I think it's really good for parents to show kids they don't know everything. Kids are kind of funny because they treat us like we don't know everything. They treat us like they don't want to hear our advice, but actually they do, and we know this from research. So showing a kid, if you have questions about like non-binary or trans identities, saying, I actually don't know that much about it. Let's go together and sort of see what we can figure out. And that might mean going to the library where there's at least half a dozen good books on gender identity. It might also mean bringing community in, right? So maybe you have a friend of the family or a family member who knows more about this, because kids really need more than us. They need more than one or two trusted adults. And so this can be that opportunity to say, let's go ask someone else.
I love that. Do you have any specific advice for parents of gender nonconforming kids?
Yeah, well, so I was a gender nonconforming kid. I didn't have that language back then. So my advice is really kind of my advice to all parents, which is to know that like your kids are whole, your kids are great and beautiful exactly as they are. They're not broken, even though we live in a world that says there's something wrong with certain kinds of kids. So that's the start, and that's so important, right? And it's important to reflect that back in daily ways. The book starts with a quote from Patty Byrne, who's a disability activist and artist, who says, there's no right and wrong way to have a body. And I think that's a hugely important message. And then beyond that, it's about getting support, right? There's lots of good support groups, both for parents and for young people who are gender nonconforming or trans or genderqueer, and knowing that there's a community out there. And I guess the last thing I'll say is I think a lot of parents are worried that it's going to mean kind of a bad life for their kids. And I can, at 51, say, like, that's not the case. There's actually this great community that is going to show up for your kids and for you. You just need to connect to them.
I love that. I love that. I was going to say, well, it's not controversial. I'm going to say, you know, when it comes to broaching those difficult discussions in our house, we watch Drag Race, and what a beautiful, easy platform to open up discussions and just be like, oh, people are very different, all of us. And it's a beautiful thing. Let's talk about something else that it's an area that certainly there's been much more recent focus on, and that is in the area of consent. I know when I was growing up, maybe all of us growing up, I don't think I ever heard that word, or at least in the form of sex education. And so today, though, I mean, this seems to be front and center. So can you give us some tips on how we broach that discussion with our kids, with, again, not making it feel like there's a big rock that just fell in the middle of the table and let's all talk about it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, my advice is make it, again, an everyday conversation and don't make it about sex. So every day, particularly with kids who don't actually have sort of full access to their rights, every day there's opportunity to talk about consent. So when you're taking your kid to the dentist, they're not actually consenting to that. They don't have a choice. And you can say, you don't have a choice about this thing we do with your body because it's my job or it's my responsibility to keep you healthy. But then you can think of other things. So maybe it's getting earrings or extracurricular activities, but something where your kid does get to consent. The goal is not just for them to understand particular rules. The goal is for them to start knowing what that feels like, knowing what it feels like in their body when their consent is ignored, right? So we want to point out when they have it and when they don't, so that as they get older and adults or peers pressure them into things, they can start feeling that, and they know that they can do something about it.
And I know you have some really strong opinions also about how sexual education is taught in the school system. Again, controversial, but shouldn't be controversial topic. But what would you like to see happen or change?
Well, I think we just need to think about the fact that there's stuff that needs to happen at home and stuff that is better to happen in the schools. And I think that what we want to see in schools is just a curriculum that's updated, right? So the curriculum does not reflect kids' daily lives. It doesn't reflect kind of violence, depression they experience. It doesn't often reflect social media and technology. And then the other thing is we need the teachers and the librarians to get more support, because it's incredibly hard work. Like, I don't even do this work, but imagine when we know what it's like to talk to our kids, imagine you have a room full of kids and you have like an hour. So the people who are doing it need our support, and I think they also need better tools.
Cory, you are one of those tools. Your books are all so wonderful. As always, love talking with you. Thank you for the work you do.
Thank you for having me.
The book is called You Know, Sex, and it is available now, but Cory has books that are for every age and appropriate level. Get yourself a copy, and we'll be right back.